Why does someone who seemed deeply invested, even in love, suddenly withdraw, disappear, or act as if you don't exist? Those moments of humiliation, control, and emotional erasure are what we began exploring in an earlier video, and we're going to continue to unpack here. Hello everyone, welcome to the Narcissism Decoder. I'm Dr. Anthony Mazzella. In the prior video, we were talking about Freud's use of the concept, His Majesty the baby. It refers to the way parents unconsciously invest their infant with grandiose qualities, treating the child as if he or she were omnipotent, perfect, and the center of the universe. This idea of, again, I quote, His Majesty the baby, you could picture it being the baby being presented in this way. But this isn't just abstract theory. It shows up in real behaviors, interactions, and patterns with people who exhibit narcissistic tendencies. Now, let's press deeper into the inner workings of this mindset. When we look closely at the dismissal, the withdrawal, the fighting, and the accusations, what we often uncover is this. When the other person is attentive and supportive, the narcissistic person feels he's entered the bliss of that idyllic state that I mentioned in the prior video, the perfect bond, the perfect union. He or she will speak about having the best possible parents, the most perfect marriage, or an amazing weekend away. It feels like the fantasy has come true. But here's the catch. In the example I shared earlier, with the man becoming dismissive and blowing off his wife, I learned that this man was already feeling withdrawn and disconnected from his wife before she even began speaking to him. When I traced it back, I found that the day before, she had been caught up in her work. Or in another case, since I see this quite frequently in my work with these individuals, a wife needed space and retired to the bedroom earlier than usual. Or, in yet another case, a date arrived for date night, slightly tired after the prior evening out with her friends. Deeper exploration revealed a consistent underlying feeling in many of these cases. It wasn't fair, and I quote, to be left alone. It felt almost cruel, as if he had been abruptly and traumatically pushed out of that illusion of oneness. His Majesty the baby fantasy of perfect togetherness and attunement collapsed. In each of these examples, when the full attention of the other is lost, the collapse is sudden and unexpected. This is not experienced just as a form of abandonment, but it is actually felt as if it's a brutal attack. In moments of separation, as small as they may seem, for those who exhibit narcissistic tendencies, the shattering of this illusion of blissful togetherness is often experienced as an expression, or let's say an explosion, like a push out of paradise. In those moments of separation, you could feel betrayed, like the person that you counted on has suddenly let you down and even turned into a persecutor who makes you feel bad or unworthy. When this happens, the mind fights back. To reestablish an equilibrium, that's the togetherness, what do you imagine happens next? What happens when the party ends? When the blissful union with a loved one is broken? Or when they no longer are treated as the priority? Remember, she retired to the bedroom early, made plans with friends, or was just in deep thought about her own work-related concerns. All of those are traumatic separations, by the way. If the omnipotent defenses that they used before to restore the bliss or idealization fail, at that point, even more powerful and rigid defenses are mounted, ones that are harder to give up and far more destructive to both the self and the relationship. So, In these moments, if I were inquiring, for example, when your wife retired to the bedroom early, did you think about checking in with her? I might hear something like, who gives a shit about what's happening with her? I'm not concerned about her problems. Why would I want to hear her complain when I have my own problems? In other words, if you are exhibiting these narcissistic defenses, you are reacting to being deeply wounded. But you and most people would never know this because this is the moment where you attack, you withdraw, you become passive aggressive, or silently hold a grudge. The inner logic might look something like this. Not again. I'm not going to be made to feel frightened, alone, powerless, or worthless ever again. In these moments, when the omnipotent fantasy cracks and the illusion of perfect togetherness is ruptured, the individual exhibiting narcissistic traits is not just resentful, they feel full of hatred. That withdrawal, or the way you completely dismiss someone who was just experienced as a loved one yesterday, is not neutral, it's erasure. By not listening, by turning away, you're sending the message, you don't exist for me. Your words carry no weight. Your needs don't matter. That silence, that absence, is itself a form of annihilation. If you have someone like this in your life, you may know that one way to annihilate you is to erase you. Not physically, but I'm talking existentially. In order to protect themselves, they try to destroy your sense of self, your confidence, your reputation, your memory of what actually happened. Another common pattern I hear described goes a little like this. She hurt me, and now I wanted her to feel that way too. So I canceled our plans. I withdrew and ignored her text messages all day when she was asking me what she did wrong. In that moment, the goal wasn't simply to communicate hurt. It was to make her feel guilty, not only for having done something wrong, but as if something was fundamentally wrong with her. Even deeper analysis of this often reveals that if she feels broken, she will need me more and come rushing back to me. In other words, in his mind, her pursuit restores what? The illusion of togetherness. This is the shared unconscious fantasy. As long as she's chasing him, there's no separateness. There's no loss. No reminder that he could be left alone. Her distress becomes proof that he still matters, that the bond is intact, that he still exists in her mind. What looks like cruelty on the surface, at its core, in other words, it's an unconscious attempt to ward off the unbearable terror of separation. In my work with individuals exhibiting narcissistic defenses, the goal is not to simply train them to be more attentive or present with their partner, not to send more frequent text messages. That would miss the deeper issue. The real focus is on helping them recognize how much of their emotional world is dictated by the unconscious fantasy of togetherness and omnipotent control. Here is a critical point. In narcissistic dynamics, both external events and internal fantasies are always at play. A partner really does go to bed early or really does need space. That's the external reality. But the fantasy world transforms the meaning of those events into catastrophic betrayal, abandonment, or humiliation. Both sides matter, the outer reality and the inner fantasy, but at different times one can completely dominate the other. And when fantasy takes over, which it typically does in these narcissistic relationships, it becomes stronger than what's actually happening in the relationship. In other words, the person isn't really responding to their partner. They're responding to the fantasy that has swallowed up the partner and recast them as the betrayer who disrespects me because what did she do? She arrived to date night a little bit tired. I want to give you a clearer sense of the problem because it's easy to focus only on the harm, the control, or the withdrawal. But the deeper question is why these patterns keep repeating. My point is that they are not simply choices or conscious strategies. They are defenses shaped and sustained by illusion. That's again the unconscious shared fantasy and the dynamic of that there should always be a perfect togetherness. And that's exactly why understanding these dynamics is so important. The withdrawal, the devaluation, the subtle or overt humiliations, they're not random. They follow a script shaped by a fragile self trying desperately to protect itself. In the next video, we'll explore what happens once we see these fantasies, understand their impact, and begin to challenge these patterns. So please, stay tuned for the next part. We're going into part 3. This is like a 3-part series on just a few of the reasons or the motives behind why does someone who is exhibiting narcissistic defenses dismiss, control, and humiliate you. I know there's still so much more to say about this topic, but we have to hold off here for now. Stay tuned. We're going to go into this in more detail in the subsequent video.